Message of hope. The Cuban people anticipate the Holy Father's uplifting words. Trump jumps in again. The billionaire presidential hopeful finds yet another fire to fuel. Vote to defund. Planned Parenthood would lose federal funding for a year under a House bill voted on today. And secret role. Intriguing revelations about a Cuban Cardinal in helping to open the diplomatic door with the U.S. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, September 18th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. By this time tomorrow, Pope Francis will be in Havana. Our team arrived there earlier this week to see how the Cuban people are preparing for his apostolic visit. Our Susie Pinto is in Havana tonight. Susie?
Brian, Pope Francis will arrive in Havana tomorrow a little after 4 p.m. He'll be the third pope to visit Cuba after John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, but he'll be the first Latin American to address Cubans in their native Spanish. Now, we've been spending a lot of time with Cubans in the local church since we arrived. Tonight, we bring you the story of one woman working in a vibrant Havana parish.
Estamos muy emocionados, sinceramente.
For Vivian Nunez, the Pope's arrival in Cuba tomorrow will be emotional. The Havana native works at the parish of St. Rita, but she was not brought up with any faith.
No quiero salir de aquí de las manos de Jesús, sé que me está aguantando.
Vivian turned to the church during a personal crisis. Now she dedicates her life to helping this parish.
Pienso que eso va a ayudar mucho a que las familias se unan.
Vivian believes the family is at the center of the papal visit to Cuba. Improved relations with the U.S. will help unite Cuban families with their relatives abroad, she says. Cuban human rights activist Rosa Maria Paya, based in Miami, is much more direct.
The people of Cuba, we have been under the oppression of the Cuban government for so many years right now.
She says after Pope John Paul II's groundbreaking visit to the island in 1998, things opened up slightly for Catholics and all Cubans. Pope Benedict XVI's visit in 2012 again put the spotlight on the regime. Now Cubans hope Pope Francis, who helped thaw relations between the U.S. and Cuba, can do even more. But Rosa Maria warns that a good U.S.-Cuba relationship won't change life for Cubans.
The Cuban problem is the totalitarian regime that have been in power for 56 years right now, not the relation with the United States.
Back in Havana, Vivian says despite the challenges, Cuban Catholics have a lot of faith.
Para los católicos, tenemos fe en que pasen cosas buenas.
For now, she says she's entrusting the future to Our Lady of Charity, patroness of Cuba, to guide her church and her nation. Brian, Vivian's parish, St. Rita, provides support to the Ladies in White, also known as the Damas de Blanco. They're a group of wives of husbands who oppose the government and are in jail, and we're told they will not be allowed to attend the Mass in Revolution Square this Sunday. Brian?
Susie Pinto in Havana. Thanks, Susie. You're in our prayers. And the day before he leaves Rome for Cuba, Pope Francis has a message for the Cuban people.
Quiero estar entre ustedes como misionero de la misericordia.
The Pope saying he comes to be with the Cuban people as a missionary of God's love and tenderness. After 4 days in Cuba, it's on to the U.S. for the World Meeting of Families by way of Washington and New York. Alan Holdren is preparing to leave Rome tomorrow on the papal plane with Francis on the way to Cuba, finally to the United States. Alan, we will hear a lot from the Pope over the next week or so. Do you have any indication what his themes will be yet?
Yeah, actually, Brian, the Secretary of State of the Vatican, who's the Pope's right-hand man for any sort of foreign matters, would have worked with him very closely on these speeches, and he gave an interview to the Vatican Television Center just last night, said that the Pope will be speaking to the United Nations and also there at Congress, particularly about the rights of human beings, the rights of every human being, particularly the right to life and the right to religious freedom, which are so important there in the United States as issues. He'll also be speaking about migration, which the Secretary of State said was very close to the Pope's heart, immigration, and also, interestingly, he's going to be celebrating that canonization in Washington, D.C. of a Spanish-born missionary. And he said that that is also a main focus of the Pope, is to invite Catholics throughout the U.S. to integrate Hispanics into their parish communities.
All right, I'm really curious, Alan. Since you travel with the Pope, does that mean you get to go wherever he goes?
I wish that were the case, Brian. No, that's not exactly the case. I'm able to make a request to be everywhere the Pope is. In this case, I will be nearly everywhere he will be in the public events. I'll be there at the White House, at Madison Square Gardens. I'll be at Congress. I'll be there at the United Nations as well. There's different varying levels of access at each of those places, but I will be there very close to him for most of the trip.
And are you cramming right now to get ready for this?
Yeah, you caught me. That's exactly what I'm doing. We're trying to figure out exactly what the Pope is doing before he does it and who he's going to be surrounded by. Reading the local media, both in Cuba and the United States, you can really tell a lot about who the Pope is going to be visiting with. A lot of people are speaking to the media. We just have to find them and hopefully find them there on site as well to be able to speak to them ourselves.
All right, we'll see you in Havana. Thanks. Have a safe trip, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The House today votes to block federal funding to Planned Parenthood for 1 year.
No matter our views on abortion or the party label beside our name, we should all have an interest in ensuring that laws are followed and that the taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly.
The bill introduced by Tennessee Representative Diane Black passed 241 to 187. It shifts Planned Parenthood's federal payments to thousands of government-backed community health centers. If it were to pass the Senate, which is unlikely at this point, the White House has promised a veto. More than a third of Planned Parenthood's budget comes from taxpayers. Carol Tobias, president of National Right to Life, is with us. With life issues being debated both in the legislative bodies as well as the political circles, is this good for the pro-life cause?
It absolutely is good for the pro-life cause. We are educating people, we are reaching out, we are letting them know how evil Planned Parenthood is. They kill unborn children, they traffic the unborn baby parts that result from the abortion. This is a great time for the pro-life movement.
Yet the other side just sort of pictures this as extreme, out of touch with the times activism. That's to be expected, though, don't you think?
They always do that.
Yeah.
You know, they try to paint us as being mean, anti-woman, uncaring, but pro-lifers know each other. We know it's not true, and we're reaching out to everybody else.
But these bills have little chance of becoming law in our current conditions. So what is the point of passing them?
It's educational, it's motivational. We today got the House of Representatives on record on two different very important pieces of legislation. We know that President Obama will veto these bills, but we're going to work very hard to get a new president in next year so that we can pass these bills and put them into law in 2017.
The other bill besides the Planned Parenthood defunding is called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. What does that entail? And that did pass.
Some babies do survive the abortion. There is a federal law that says they have to be treated like any other human being, but they haven't been.
There are no penalties involved.
Right, there are no penalties. It would be up to the states or the local law enforcement agencies to do something. The bill that was passed today would establish federal criminal penalties and civil remedies so that not only the abortionist, but anyone else who is in that room with him or her, if they see a baby that survives an abortion, the baby is still alive, they have to take care of that baby. They have to treat that baby as if it was a premature birth.
Which it is.
And take care of that child.
So Monday there's another important vote in the Senate, correct?
The Senate will begin debating on Monday. The vote is on Tuesday. The Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act that passed this summer in the House is going to the Senate.
Just before Pope Francis arrives.
Yes.
Carol Tobias, the president of National Right to Life. Thank you for being with us tonight, Carol.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Croatia can't take any more people. So says its interior minister. After Hungary closed its southern border with Serbia, thousands of migrants are now pouring into Croatia. From there, they hope to reach Germany, traveling through Slovenia and then Austria. But some who made it to Croatia are actually being sent back to Hungary. At least 7,300 people had entered the country from Serbia by midday Thursday. The Croatian prime minister says his country won't build fences, but it is physically closing its border.
Croatia has no agenda here. Our agenda is humanitarian, but we have to warn everyone that from today we are going to apply other methods, humane methods, not Hungarian methods, because we cannot accept this burden anymore.
Those who have made it this far face yet another potential roadblock. Slovenia appears ready to follow Hungary's lead, sealing off its borders with Croatia. A Syrian refugee family is already being hosted by the Vatican, living in an apartment near St. Peter's Basilica. The father, mother, and their 2 children come from Damascus. They're members of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church. In a statement today, the Vatican says the family arrived in Italy September 6th. That is the very day Pope Francis appealed to European parishes to house refugees, promising the Vatican would do the same. Power remains out for tens of thousands of people in Chile after a deadly earthquake struck off the coast on Wednesday. At least 11 people have died. More than 170 homes were destroyed. The 8.3 magnitude quake triggered tsunami warnings along South America's west coast. Advisories went up as far away as California. Chilean President Michelle Bachelet says efficient disaster planning helped prevent an even more serious tragedy. Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump is once again on the hot seat. At a town hall event, a man asked when the U.S. can get rid of Muslims, calling President Obama a Muslim. Wyatt Goolsby reports on the controversy over Trump's response or lack of it.
A lot of people are saying that bad things are happening out there.
A new controversy for Donald Trump coming just a day after CNN's GOP debate.
Problem in this country, it's called Muslims. We know our current president is one. Right. You know he's not even an American.
We need this
birth
question.
certificate, man.
The Republican frontrunner back in the headlines after his vague and evasive response to this anti-Muslim supporter at a town hall in New Hampshire.
But anyway, we have training camps growing where they want to kill us. Mm-hmm. That's my question. When can we get rid of them?
We're going to be looking at a lot of different things. And, you know, a lot of people are saying that.
Trump taking heat for not correcting the man the way Senator John McCain did while running for president in 2008.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am.
Meanwhile, on the Today Show, Chris Christie saying he would have taken the route McCain took.
That if somebody at one of my town hall meetings said something like that, I would correct them and say, no, the president's a Christian, and he was born in this country. I mean, I think those 2 things are self-evident.
Trump's camp is claiming the billionaire did not hear the question about Obama being a Muslim, saying, quote, the media want to make this an issue about Obama, but it's about him waging a war on Christianity. Still, Democrats are quick to pounce. Hillary Clinton, at a substance abuse forum in New Hampshire Thursday, tweeted, not denouncing false statements about the president and hateful rhetoric about Muslims is disturbing and wrong. Cut it out. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, who could be more important than the president at the White House? The Pope, perhaps. And a cardinal's behind-the-scenes role in brokering a prisoner swap between the U.S. and Cuba. I ask you to join me in praying for my trip to Cuba in the United States. I need your prayers. Today's tweet from Pope Francis. Thanks for joining us on this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Thousands will pack the White House lawn to welcome Pope Francis in just 5 days. The arrival ceremony is not without controversy. Jason Calvi is there tonight. Jason, how were people invited?
Well, Brian, several groups were involved with the invitations, including the White House, the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities, as well as the Archdiocese of Washington. But there are some who are very upset with the invitation of the head of the Nuns on the Bus, a gay blogger, as well as the former gay Episcopalian bishop. The Wall Street Journal reports that the Vatican is not pleased, but they will be part of the 14,000 to 15,000 people on the South Lawn.
After the welcoming ceremony, the president and the Pope will have a private meeting in the Oval Office. In June, a White House team went to the Vatican to prepare the themes and agenda for the Pope and President's meeting. While the two disagree on abortion and marriage, the White House says the Pope operates on a spiritual plane.
We want to let the Pope speak for himself. He will calibrate exactly what he wants to say, and I think we see his message as, providing a moral and spiritual backdrop to the decisions we make in government or in our own lives.
The co-chair of the House's pro-life caucus says the Pope has an important role, speaking truth to power.
Barack Obama, for example, is the abortion president. Both domestically and internationally, he has promoted abortion 24/7. Planned Parenthood has killed 7 million babies. Nobody supports Planned Parenthood more robustly than President Obama.
Still, the White House says the president wants the visit to have lasting value. So they say they'll set up new initiatives to promote common objectives.
This Pope has been able to strike a chord on issues that affect people around the globe.
That was during a conference call with reporters. Now, during the time of the papal presidential visit, the Vatican Secretary of State will be meeting with senior White House officials as well as cabinet members. Brian?
Jason, what about the vice president? What role is he playing in this?
Vice President Biden will have an important role in the papal visit. He will be at the welcoming ceremony, the canonization mass, the speech to Congress, and he'll also be leading the farewell ceremony in Philly.
Jason Calvi at the White House. Thank you, Jason. Catherine Jean Lopez is Senior Fellow at the National Review Institute and the founding director of Catholic Voices USA. Can the Vatican in any way prevent the Pope's visit from being politicized?
Well, you know, they can't control the media, obviously, but I actually think Catholics, everyday Catholics, can play a role here. The Holy Father is going to be here among us, with us. We'll be praying with him. We can let his words speak for themselves. And I actually think we have an opportunity where we can point to what he's saying and doing, rather than so often we rely on, with the time zone change differences and whatnot, we have to rely on what comes out in international press. If the Pope says something in the morning, we're relying on the AP story, the BBC story, the New York Times story. We don't have to rely on that. We're watching it live on TV, or we're with him. I think we can all play a role in our conversations with people and not have to rely on the interpretations from the media so much.
Pope Francis tends to wade into issues that are seen here, at least, as political. He usually addresses them from a pastoral standpoint, but that makes it kind of tough to keep politics out of this.
Yeah, but again, I think Catholics who know what they're talking about, in as much as they've read Laudato Si, his encyclical on creation, all of creation, which includes marriage and family, I think that's an important thing for Catholics to be engaged on in the next couple of days, because he is here for the world meeting of families. Yes, he's speaking to Congress. Yes, he's speaking at the United Nations. But the purpose of this trip is the world meeting of families.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really important thing for people to focus on, because he can help us not just on the issue of same-sex marriage, on actually renewing and rebuilding family life, which will help everybody on every issue, right?
The Cuba trip was added at the end, but it's an important trip. He'll be there all weekend into next week. What do you hope comes out of that?
Well, I take the Holy Father at his word. He wants to be a missionary of mercy there, all right? There are people who are in need of hope and encouragement, and that's what he's telling people he wants to do there, be a father there. That's the important part about this trip, I think, for people to bear in mind. He's not, as you said, he's a pastor. He's not a politician, and we should take off our political lens as we're watching him, and again, let him speak for himself and pray with him.
That's the best thing we can do. Catherine Jean Lopez, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, Pope Francis gets credit as the chief advocate for renewing diplomatic ties between Washington and Havana. We have new insight tonight into the secret dealings that made it happen and the Cardinal who saw it all.
I want to thank His Holiness Pope Francis, whose moral example shows us the importance of pursuing the world as it should be.
On the day of the breakthrough in relations between Cuba and the U.S., both Presidents Raul Castro and Barack Obama mentioned that Pope Francis played a role in the agreement. Not mentioned was Cardinal Jaime Ortega, the Pope's man in Havana. He apparently was at the center of parts of the secret diplomacy. Cardinal Ortega revealed to CNN that the first time they met at the Vatican, Francis encouraged President Obama to change U.S. policy towards Cuba. Obama surprised the Pope by agreeing with him. The president's response was very clear, he says, that these measures were very old, made before his birth, and that he wished to change them. This encouraged the Pope, and he made the important argument that it would benefit the Cuban people who had suffered under these measures. The Cardinal said the Church was not directly involved in the negotiations. It acted as a back channel, partly to help arrange a prisoner exchange. Cuba wanted to trade 3 captured intelligence agents for jailed State Department contractor Alan Gross. The U.S. needed a better deal. The Cardinal thought of Rolando Saraf, a Cuban intelligence official imprisoned for spying for the CIA. He had prayed with Saraf during a prison visit. He wrote me a letter as someone who could be exchanged, Ortega says. It was something separate from the Pope's contribution. He wrote saying he could be traded. Secret meetings were held at the Vatican and in Canada. Colonel Alejandro Castro, Raul Castro's son, reportedly represented Cuba, and the prisoner deal was struck. As a result, relations between the church and the state in Cuba are also improving. The desire that Raul Castro expressed towards the U.S. was that we can live with our differences, he says, but in a civilized manner. That's the desire that the church has also expressed to the government. The church is not the enemy. A new beginning Pope Francis will herald when he arrives in Cuba. Up next, hundreds of thousands of free Mass booklets are printed for the Papal Mass in Philadelphia. And a D.C. hospital wing is named for Pope Francis ahead of his arrival next week. On this Friday, a throwback photo from the last papal visit to Philadelphia. The World Meeting of Families tweeted out this picture of a young St. John Paul II. This was 1979. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Andrew Walters, Vice President of Communications and Strategic Planning for the Knights of Columbus. Tell us about the behind-the-scenes work the Knights are doing for the big Mass in Philadelphia.
Well, the Knights of Columbus are involved in a number of ways. We have several hundred ushers that will be helping at the Mass. We have thousands of volunteers involved in one way or another with the World Meeting of Families, and we've printed for them the Mass books for that major Mass in Philadelphia.
How many did you have to print up?
350,000.
How long does that take?
That takes 8 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, about 12 hours a day, 8 days.
What's in the book? Can you describe it? I know you have a copy there.
Sure. The book itself is all the prayers of the Mass, the music, the readings. It's in multiple languages. There's Latin, there's Greek, there's English, Spanish, Vietnamese. Wow. So a lot of proofreading went into this.
So is it designed then for people to keep as a keepsake, as a remembrance of this incredible time?
Well, you know, I think a lot of people when they go to a papal Mass are looking for something to keep. And this is a natural thing, I think, for people to hold on to because it's a clear connection to the day, and it's very meaningful for us to be able to help these people who are going to be there with the Pope to connect with him and to connect with the Lord as they pray at that wonderful event.
Yeah, the Knights of Columbus do such great work for our church, and really what this does, it sounds like to me, is it centers us on the liturgy versus the event itself.
Yes, I mean the whole point of the book is to be able to follow along with the Mass, to see the readings in your language if they're spoken in another language, etc. And so for us, this is something that is supposed to aid in people's worship at this Mass, and I think it's a great connection spiritually for people, a very tangible reminder of the spiritual connection that will be occurring.
Andrew, thank you for being with us, and we thank the Knights for their support of EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you very much, Brian.
And a Catholic hospital here in D.C. renames its emergency department the Pope Francis Emergency Care Center today. As Mark Irons reports, this comes just days before Francis arrives here in our nation's capital.
That welcomes the needy.
Everybody that comes into the emergency department is a family member for me.
Washington native Dr. William Strudwick is the director of emergency care at Providence Hospital, a place that is marked by faith.
Every day starts with a prayer. Every meeting starts with a prayer. We don't pretend like that's not part of giving people care.
Founded in 1861 by the Daughters of Charity, this hospital has been Catholic since the start. And now, the oldest active D.C. hospital has something new.
Bless the Pope Francis Emergency Care Center.
A new name.
This emergency center takes in everybody. All you have to do is have a need, and this emergency center responds to it. Doesn't that sound like Pope Francis?
The idea to name the center after Francis was formed almost a year ago at a hospital board meeting. Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, brought the request before the Pope, who, reluctant at first, agreed to the idea.
From the very beginning, we have responded to the mission to serve those who are suffering, those who are marginalized.
Sister Baumgartner with the Daughters of Charity works alongside Dr. William Strudwick at a place that's been serving the sick well before Pope Francis made a name for himself. The Holy Father isn't scheduled to visit the hospital during his U.S. visit next week, but his influence will stay here in D.C. for decades to come. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark. And for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Watch Pope Francis in Cuba starting tomorrow on EWTN. Next week, we are with the Pope every step of the way. Have a good weekend, and God bless you.